Welcome back to At Home with Cathy. Today we are going to do something very simple, a stamped throw rug. We're going to do a little twist on it and that we're going to make it reversible. I don't know about your house, but I find quite often one side of my rug is quite dirty and I need to flip it over quickly or find another one before somebody comes, and I just flip it over and there you go, 2 rugs before I have to launder it. The beautiful thing about painting with Annie Sloan Paint is that it is very washable. Once it is cured to this fabric, it doesn't wash out. So let's get started. We're going to do a stencil on one side, and then we're following the Quick and Easy Paint Transformations, which has been our book this season. We're going to follow something Annie has done here. She had done a painted floor. I don't have a floor I want to paint, but a painted floor rug seems to be just as good. And in this, it's very simple. She has painted the whole thing gray and then done a combination of stamping using sponges in the yellow and the cream. Well, we're going to use the cream of this rug as our background and stamp in complementary colors. First thing we're going to do, though, is the stencil on one side. Annie has some gorgeous stencils. And recently we have been delighted to find out that with our new paint supplier coming directly from England, the prices on our stencils are down to half of what they were. So I chose this stencil. It's called Trees. It's just simple little trees with a little house on it. What I did find right off the bat was it's a bit hard to see the stencil and the image against this cream. So I put pieces of green tape just on the outside of my stencil. I'm going to do this stencil in a pattern. My mat, I should show you my mat, is a basic 2x3 Indian cotton woven rug. Nothing special to it at all. I want my pattern to be the trees going this way and then the trees going this way. So I really want it to be sort of so that if I'm standing, no matter which way I'm looking at it, the trees are going to be upright to me. So I'm going to do it by folding it in half to do this first one and putting my stencil, making sure I have my trees this way up. This is the end of my stencil. This will I did a rough measurement. Now, if I were doing this, it's not going to look perfect because it's on a bumpy fabric. So that's the first thing. It's not going to be as smooth as if I were doing it on a wall or a hard painted surface. I do need to hold this down. No matter how much I tape it, I'm not going to get a great contact. So I'm going to end up using my hands to put it down. So I'm just using the edge of the stencil. I've lined it up with the rug edge, and the very edge on the outside I've lined it up with the rug edge, and the tape is just helping me keep it in position. We're going to do this in Provence. And when you stencil, I find, any of you who saw last season, I stenciled using the sponge rollers. So nice to use. About 2 inches. Slide it on. And you do need a little surface to roller it on. You can use a paint tray. I find the top of one of my little shoebox lids works really well because it kind of has a little indentation in it and the paint doesn't roll. I'll clean it up a little bit. When I'm stenciling, I need a good coverage on my roller, but I also need less paint. If you use too much paint when you're rolling, you're just going to gob the paint underneath the stencil. So I'm sort of rolling away. What I'm doing in this case is pushing the paint into the roller. And I'm going to find the edge of my stencil and I'm just going to give it a roll, keeping my hand there to give it some weight and to stop it from moving. Don't try and roll the whole thing at once, just work on one little image at a time. If you try and do it all at once, it's going to move too much. Move the can so you can see what I'm doing. And again, it won't be perfect because underneath the mat is very bumpy. It's a chintzy mat, so they're woven, and they're woven from irregular strips of fabric. They're just little fun trees, and they sort of have a little landscape line here. And when I need a little more paint, I do the same thing. I pick it up, I roller it out to make it even. Go back. This is one of those incredibly simple projects. You do not have to know how to paint to do a stencil project. Oh. I have my trees. I'm going to move it along, and I'm using the tape as my guide, and again the edge of the mat. Lining it up, not taping it to my paint tray. Get that paint on there quite evenly, and doing it again. When you work with stencils, you want to get them washed off quite quickly, because the paint will set on the stencil and it'll form sort of an edge, and then the next time you go to use it, if you haven't washed it off really well, it will be more difficult to get the paint not to bleed through, because it makes the stencil thicker. You can use a stencil brush. I just find a stencil roller is faster, and I actually find it does a better job. Move it along, line it up with the edge of my mat, and this time I'm going to lift my mat and move it along as well. When you're painting fabric like this, there's really no prep. One thing I would recommend is that you wash your project first. Wash the mat first. If there's sometimes factories have things, something called sizing, or they have a chemical on the mat to stop bugs from wanting to live in it, particularly if it's been imported. Those things can make it paint resistant. The paint won't want to be absorbed. It'll make the fabric so it's less absorbent. The paint won't absorb, so you may not be as happy with your finished product. And when I'm done, I'll just let it dry. I could heat set it with an iron once it was dry as well. And then I'm going to do just a little overlap here, so I want it to be just a few more trees. So I'm going to do about half of this stencil. Again, just lining up that edge. If I really was going to be a perfectionist about it, I would take a piece of tape, and I'll do that just to show you, and I wanted this edge to end, because I had it here, I wanted it to end right here. So eyeballing a little bit. I want these trees to be blocked off. So I'll block them off so they can't be stenciled. Line this up and just roller the trees to the left of where I blocked it, and the little house. That's a great thing about stencils. You can really control where you're painting by using painter's tape to block out where you don't want paint to be. Now I flip it over and I do the same thing on the other side, but now I've got a cute little stenciled rug. Let it dry, heat set it if I like with an iron, and we have a new little kitchen mat. So let's show you a different technique for the other side. For the flip side of this little floor mat, we're going to do a different technique. And what I want to do is just kind of make sure that I'm going to use little sponges, and they are 2.5 inches. Again, I'm not worried about this being totally perfect. This is stamped on very rough fabric. It's never going to look perfectly painted, but just roughly 36 inches. The tag, I can rip it off. It's at the manufacturer, just away from the manufacturers. So now my rug is completely reversible, no tag. But I might want to set this in just a little bit. I might not want paint all the way down here to make it look more like a border. I'm going to kind of put a little mark here, just with my pencil. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just give it a little bit of a little X. And that kind of tells me roughly how this is going to measure out. So now I'm going to center this up just a little bit. Get an X here and an X here, which fortunately is the width of my table. And I'm about 29.5 inches. If each of these is roughly 2.5 inches, I've got 10, say 10 I can go. And we're just going to kind of eyeball it. I could get really technical, put tape down and mark out where I want it to go. And if I were doing a very intricate pattern, I probably would do all that. But for this, I'm just going to do something very simple because I don't want this to be all structured and patterned. So I can throw my measuring tape away. I'm going to use 2 colors. We're going to use the Provence that we used on the flip side with the tree stencil. We're going to use a little bit of Scandinavian pink on the other side. I'm thinking this mat is going to end up being in the kitchen, so I thought this would be a nice color contrast. When you're working with a paint like this, you don't want big gobs of paint. So I'm going to use the edge of the container to wipe off the paint a little bit. At the same time, I'm going to look at the bottom, the underside. You can stamp with anything. I'm just using these very simple kitchen sponges. But I do want to make sure I have a good coverage on that. Do the same thing here with my Provence. I'm going to need more paint. If I mess up that, I'm going to pour a little bit more from onto there so that we're not having to do this part way through. Give myself a good amount of paint, make sure it's in and saturate it quite evenly. Okay, then I'm going to start, put it roughly here, press it down. Nice square. Do the same thing. I'm not touching them, just a shade off. Same thing. You can see I have to pick up a little bit more paint. Quite a bit of paint is actually going through the sponge too. That's better. So, learn my lesson. Add a little bit of paint. Look at it underneath to make sure it's not all gobby. And do that again. And just keep going all down and make myself a little block pattern all the way down the edge of the mat. Fabric always takes quite a bit of paint. It's always surprising how much soaks in. And that's of course why it takes time to dry as well. It's longer than painting on wood or a painted surface. Now here I want to make sure that I'm going to be somewhat close to a pattern at the end. So I've got one more pink one, one more blue one, and one more pink one. One more Provence. And you can tell when you look at the underside, I can see here that there's not as much paint. So I want to add, I'll just grab a little bit more paint to make sure it's a little bit more even. I like using this size sponge because it's the same size as the palm of my hand. And look, there we go. I'm gonna add one more. Now I think I'm gonna have to add a little bit more paint. And make sure it's even again. You could cut your sponges into shapes. You could use almost anything you want for stamping, as long as it will leave a paint impression. There. So we've gone all the way down and created a border. From here, I could just create whatever I wanted to. Maybe I want to come and figure out how many blocks I could actually go across. Maybe I'll do another pattern on the way back with do it back to back and have the Scandinavian pink and then my Provence and do it alternating, because that would make it look balanced. I do want it to look balanced, but when I finish this mat and let it dry, I'm going to have two completely different looks. And it'll be a very serviceable mat. It'll throw in the wash, which is perfect. And it'll keep our feet a little bit warmer in the kitchen. I'll finish this mat up, show it to you in one of our future episodes, and we invite you to come into the store and discuss your projects, anything you might like to try. We're always there with advice and ideas, and we love to share our knowledge with you. Come visit us at Absolutely Fabulous at Home.